I think we've all had that moment, that feeling deep in your gut that you're being undervalued, that your contributions, your loyalty, your simple presence is being taken for granted. For me, that feeling wasn't just a moment, it was a decade. My name is Will, and this is the story of how I inherited a pile of junk that turned out to be worth more than my brother's entire life. If you've ever felt like the world has you pegged wrong, or if you just want to hear how quiet competence can upend arrogant greed, then stick around, let me know what you think in the comments, and maybe subscribe for more stories like this. It all started in a cold, mahogany-paneled lawyer's office, the kind of place that smells of old paper and settled accounts. The air was thick with the ghost of my father, a man who had been a giant in his field and a ghost in his own home. The day my father, Arthur, passed away was quiet. It was a Tuesday. I'd just finished helping him with his lunch, a simple soup he could manage without much trouble. He'd looked at me, his eyes clearer than they'd been in months, and given a small, almost imperceptible nod. He fell asleep in his favorite armchair, an hour later, and never woke up. For 10 years, my life had been a repeating cycle of medication schedules, changing adult diapers, and the low, constant hum of the machines in his workshop, the one place he still felt alive. I was 32 when my mother died, a promising junior architect with a small firm downtown. I was 42 when my father followed her, a full-time caregiver with a 10-year gap in my resume and the faint permanent scent of antiseptic on my hands. I was by every societal metric, the family failure. My brother Ethan was the family success. A venture capitalist with a corner office, a German car, and a portfolio that was the subject of fawning articles in business magazines. He lived 3 time zones away and measured his familial duty in monthly phone calls. The calls were always the same. Brusque. Efficient. He'd ask, "How's the old man? Still kicking?" It was never a question of genuine concern, it was an inventory check. He was waiting for his primary asset, our father's portfolio of patents, to be liquidated. He saw Dad not as a person, but as a holding company in its final, inconvenient stages of life. So there we were, in that lawyer's office. Me in a suit that was a decade out of style, and Ethan, checking his phone, radiating an impatience that felt like a physical force. The lawyer, a man named Sterling, who looked like he'd been born in a 3-piece suit, cleared his throat and began to read the last will and testament of Arthur Vance. The legalese washed over me. It was a simple document. The house, a beautiful old craftsman my father had built himself, was left to Ethan. The bank account, which I knew held a considerable sum from his early successes, also went to Ethan. My brother's face didn't even flicker. This was what he expected. It was his due. Then Sterling looked over his spectacles at me. "And to my son William," he read, his voice flat, "who gave me his time when I had nothing else left to offer, I leave the entire contents of my workshop. I also leave him 1 sealed manila envelope, to be given to him alone." I felt a cold wave of humiliation wash over me. Ethan didn't even try to hide his smirk. It was a small, cruel twitch of his lips that said everything. He got the assets. I got the junk. The workshop was a tinkerer's paradise, but to an outsider, it was a hoarder's nightmare. Lathes, oscilloscopes, strange half-finished contraptions, and shelves upon shelves of dusty components. It was, in financial terms, worthless. It was the final confirmation of my status, the loser who got stuck with the sentimental garbage while the winner walked away with the prize. Sterling slid the thick, yellowed envelope across the polished table. It had my name on it, written in my father's spidery, precise script. I took it, my hands feeling clumsy and thick. Ethan stood up, adjusting his cuffs. "Well, that's that," he said. "Not to me, but to the room. I'll have an estate agent contact you, Will. I want the house cleared and on the market by the end of the month. You can have a yard sale for all that junk in the workshop if you want. Might make you a few bucks." He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture devoid of any warmth. It was a dismissal. "Let me know when the keys are ready." And then he was gone, leaving behind the lingering scent of his expensive cologne and the echoing finality of his words. I sat there for a long time, the manila envelope feeling impossibly heavy in my lap. I was the family failure who got stuck changing diapers. And now, I was the family janitor, tasked with clearing out the scraps. I drove back to the house, Ethan's house, in a daze. The quiet was deafening. For the first time in a decade, there was no one to check on, no meal to prepare. No low hum from the sick room. I walked through the silent rooms, my footsteps echoing. I ended up, as I always did, at the door to the workshop. I pushed it open. The familiar smell of ozone, metal, and old wood filled my lungs. It was the only part of the house that still smelled like my father. I sat down on his worn stool, the one I'd sat on for countless hours watching him work, and I finally opened the envelope. Inside, there were no stock certificates. No hidden bank details. There were blueprints. Dozens of them, rolled tightly and tied with twine. They were drawn with my father's unmistakable hand, filled with calculations that soared beyond my architectural training, but whose elegance I could still appreciate. Beneath the blueprints was a small leather-bound journal, and beneath that, a heavy metallic object wrapped in oilcloth. It was a prototype. Small, intricate, a lattice of polished steel and strange milky white crystalline plates. Tucked into the journal was a single folded note. I opened it. It read, "One son wanted my money, the other wanted my time. Only he deserves my work." My breath hitched. It wasn't an inheritance. It was a coronation. And in that dusty, silent workshop, surrounded by what my brother had called junk, I felt the first spark of a cold, quiet fire. The world thought I was a failure. My brother thought I was a janitor. My father, it turned out, thought I was his heir. The days that followed the will reading were a blur of oppressive silence and crushing loneliness. The house, which had been my entire world for a decade, was no longer a home. It was a museum of my own obsolescence, a property waiting to be liquidated. Ethan, true to his word, had an estate agent, a painfully cheerful woman named Brenda, with teeth so white they looked like a threat, call me the very next day. She spoke of staging and curb appeal, and maximizing the return on this lovely piece of real estate. I listened numbly, agreeing to everything. I had 30 days to erase 10 years of my life and the entirety of my father's. Every morning, I'd wake up with the phantom feeling of purpose, my body instinctively ready to start the caregiving routine, only to be hit by the crushing reality of its absence. The silence was a physical weight. I'd walk past my father's empty room and feel a hollow ache in my chest. This wasn't just grief for a lost parent. It was the disorienting vertigo of losing the very structure of my existence. Who was I, if not my father's keeper? The world outside had moved on for 10 years. My friends from my old life had families, mortgages, promotions. I had calloused hands from adjusting a hospital bed and an encyclopedic knowledge of medication side effects. I felt like a man out of time, a relic of a life that was now officially over. The workshop became my sanctuary. It was the only place that didn't feel empty. It was full of him. I spent hours just sitting on his stool, running my hands over the cool metal of the lathe, breathing in the scent of solder and machine oil. I'd pick up his tools, feeling the worn grooves in the wooden handles where his fingers had rested for thousands of hours. It was in that workshop that the full weight of my brother's disdain truly settled in. Junk. He had looked at this, our father's life's work, his passion, his very soul made manifest in steel and wire, and seen only a mess to be cleared away. The contempt in that single word was a brand on my soul. I started to read the journal I'd found in the envelope. It wasn't like his other workbooks, which were filled with dense equations and schematics. This one was different. It was personal. He wrote about my mother's passing, the crushing grief that had driven him from the world and into the solitary confinement of his workshop. He wrote about his disappointment in Ethan. He sees the world as a series of transactions. One entry read, "He calls to check on his investment, not his father." He looks at my patents and sees a dollar sign. He doesn't see the years, the sweat, the failures, the single, burning desire to build something that matters. Then I found the entries about me. They were hard to read, my eyes blurring with tears. "Will came home today," he wrote, "about a week after he'd gotten sick. He's putting his life on hold. For me, I feel a shame so profound it steals my breath. But I also feel a flicker of something I thought was long dead, hope. He sits with me. He doesn't talk much. He just is. He watches me work. He asks questions. Not about the market value, but about the principles. He wants to understand. He has the eye for structure, the patience of a builder. I flashed back to those long quiet afternoons. I'd sit on the stool, watching him tinker. At first, I was just keeping him company, making sure he was safe. But over time, I started to absorb it. He'd talk, more to himself than to me, explaining the problems he was trying to solve. He was obsessed with the concept of resonance, the idea that at the right frequency, you could achieve incredible things with minimal energy. "The world is shouting, Will," he'd murmur, his hands steady as he adjusted a tiny component. "Everyone is using brute force. More power, more pressure. They're trying to smash the lock. But if you find the right key, the right frequency, the lock opens on its own." He was talking about his desalination project. For years, I had thought it was just a hobby, a complex puzzle to keep his brilliant mind occupied as his body failed him. I never grasped the true scale of it. I remembered one afternoon, about a year before he passed. Ethan had called. I'd held the phone to Dad's ear. I could hear Ethan's loud, impatient voice, clearly. "Dad, I've been talking to some people at a tech fund. There's a lot of money in green tech. If you've got anything on that water purification stuff, you should let me start shopping it around. We could be talking 9 figures." My father had simply closed his eyes. I'd taken the phone back and told Ethan he was tired. After I hung up, my father opened his eyes and looked at me. "He's a crow, Will," he'd said. His voice raspy. "He sees something shining and wants to carry it off to his nest. He doesn't care what it is. He only cares that it glitters." Reading his journals, I finally understood. The desalination project wasn't a hobby. It was his magnum opus. It was his answer to a world he felt had become too loud, too greedy, too brutal. And he had left it to me. Not because I was a brilliant engineer, but because he trusted me. He knew I wouldn't see it as a glittering object to be sold. I would see the work. I would understand the purpose. This realization became my catalyst. The fog of grief and aimlessness began to burn away, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. This wasn't just about honoring my father. This was about proving him right. It was about showing my brother and the world the profound difference between value and price. Ethan had gotten the house and the money, the things that could be counted. But I had been given the work, the thing that counted. I spent the next week in a feverish state of activity. I didn't just look at the blueprints. I studied them. I cross-referenced them with his other notebooks. The ones filled with the dense mathematics that I had watched him scribble for years. I had spent a decade as his apprentice without even realizing it. The language of his work, once a foreign tongue, was now becoming familiar. I could see the patterns, the logic, the sheer breathtaking elegance of his solution. He wasn't just filtering water. He was using harmonic resonance to vibrate the water molecules themselves, causing them to shed their salt ions like a dog shaking off water. It required almost no pressure and a fraction of the energy of traditional reverse osmosis. It wasn't an improvement. It was a revolution. I knew I was out of my depth. I was a caregiver and a rusty architect. Not a physicist. I needed a translator, a guide, someone who spoke my father's language fluently. There was only one name in his journals that was mentioned with consistent, unadulterated respect: Dr. Iris Thorne. Iris had been my father's contemporary, his friendly rival and closest friend in their early days at the university, before my mother's death had sent Dad into his shell. They had published papers together, challenged each other, pushed each other. According to the journals, they had a falling out not of anger but of sorrow. Iris had tried to pull my father out of his grief, and my father had pushed him away, unable to face the world. They hadn't spoken in 15 years. Finding him was surprisingly easy. He was the head of the physics department at a major technical university, a titan in his field. I found his email address on the university website. For 2 days, I stared at a blank draft, trying to find the right words. How do you explain a decade of silence, a secret inheritance, and a potentially world-changing technology in a single email? In the end, I kept it simple. "Dr. Thorne," I wrote. "My name is Will Vance. I am Arthur Vance's son. My father passed away 2 weeks ago. He left me his final project. I believe you are the only person in the world who would understand it. I need your help." I attached a single high-resolution photograph of the main schematic, the one my father had labeled, the heart. Then I hit send, my own heart pounding in my chest. For the next 24 hours, the silence in the house was different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with a taut, nervous anticipation. I packed boxes during the day, a robot going through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere. I was constantly checking my phone, my email, waiting for a response that might never come. Maybe Eris was still angry. Maybe he thought it was a prank. Maybe he was just too busy to care about the ramblings of his long-lost friend's son. The call came at 7 a.m. the next morning. An unknown number. I answered it. My throat dry. "This is Will Vance." The voice on the other end was deep, resonant, and carried an accent I couldn't quite place, a mix of British and something else. "Mr. Vance. This is Eris Thorne. I received your email. I am looking at your photograph. Where did you get this?" "My father left it for me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It was in his will." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his faint breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. The professional curtness was gone, replaced by a stunned reverence. "My God," he murmured. "The madman. He actually did it." The resonance cascade. "We talked about it 30 years ago, over a bottle of cheap scotch. I told him it was impossible. A theoretical dead end." He paused. "Mr. Vance. Will. Is the prototype functional?" "I think so," I said. "It's all here. The blueprints, the power source, the journals explaining the calibration sequence. I don't know what to do with it." "You do nothing," Eris said, his voice now sharp and commanding. "Don't talk to anyone. Don't plug it in. Don't let anyone see it. I'm on the next flight." The call with Eris Thorne changed everything. The oppressive weight of solitude lifted, replaced by a surge of adrenaline and a terrifying, exhilarating sense of purpose. He wasn't just a consultant, he was a link to my father's past and the key to my future. He arrived 2 days later. Not in a flashy town car, but in a dusty rental sedan. He was a man in his late 60s, tall and wiry, with a shock of white hair that seemed to defy gravity and eyes that burned with an intense, restless intelligence. He looked at me, then at the workshop door, and gave a sad smile. He never did throw anything away. Did he? He walked into the workshop and stood in the middle of the room, turning in a slow circle. It wasn't like Ethan's dismissive glance. Eris was reading the room, seeing the history, the abandoned projects, the thought processes left on chalkboards. "I haven't been in this room since your mother's funeral," he said softly. He locked the door on the world, and on me. "I tried, you know. For a year I tried. But his grief was a fortress. I couldn't get through." He looked at me, his gaze analytical but not unkind. "He let you in." "I was the warden," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "No. Eris corrected, his eyes sweeping over the scattered notes and components. "You were the apprentice. You just didn't have a title." He walked over to the bench, where I had laid out the blueprints and the prototype. He didn't touch them at first. He just looked, his head cocked to one side. He spent nearly an hour in silence, poring over the schematics, his fingers tracing the lines without making contact, as if they were sacred texts. He picked up the journals, his lips moving silently as he read my father's spidery script. Finally, he looked at the prototype, still wrapped in its oilcloth. "May I?" he asked. I nodded. With the gentle precision of a surgeon, he unwrapped it. The device gleamed under the single bare bulb of the workshop. It was smaller than I expected, no bigger than a shoebox, a dense lattice of steel, copper wiring, and the strange milky white plates that seemed to drink the light. "Ceramic transducers," Eris murmured, his voice filled with awe. "Piezoelectric. But the composition, I've never seen anything like this. He must have synthesized these himself." He pointed to a series of impossibly fine copper coils. "And this is the emitter array. This is what generates the resonant field. My God, Will, this isn't just a blueprint. He built the damn thing." For the next 2 weeks, the workshop was transformed. It was no longer a tomb of memories, but a humming, vibrant laboratory. Eris was a force of nature. He worked with a furious, joyful energy, a man rediscovering a lost passion. He taught me how to read the diagnostic equipment, how to interpret the power flow diagrams, how to handle the delicate components. We spent hours calibrating the transducers, following my father's meticulous instructions in the journal. It was during this time that I realized how much I truly had absorbed over the years. I knew the tools. I understood the processes. I could anticipate the next step. I wasn't my father, but I was his son. And I spoke a dialect of his language. Your father wasn't just an engineer, Eris said one evening. As we sat surrounded by wiring and open manuals, the smell of hot electronics filling the air. He was an artist. Any brute can force a solution. Reverse osmosis, that's brute force. You're just shoving water through a filter with immense pressure. It's expensive, inefficient, and tears the hell out of the membranes. It's a sledgehammer. This, he said, gesturing to the prototype. This is a skeleton key. Arthur found the one precise ultrasonic frequency that excites the covalent bonds in the water molecule itself. The water literally shrugs off the salt. The moment of truth came on a Thursday afternoon. We had triple-checked every connection, run every diagnostic. We set up a simple test. A large tank of salt water mixed to the exact salinity of the Pacific Ocean and a collection beaker. We hooked the prototype up to a small specialized battery pack my father had designed. According to Arthur's notes, Eris said, his voice tense with anticipation, this should be a low-power initiation. If we've calibrated this correctly, it should draw less power than a child's nightlight. He took a deep breath. All right, Will. On your mark. I flipped the switch. There was no roar, no flash of light. There was only a barely audible, high-pitched hum, a clean, pure tone that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. A small indicator light on the device glowed green. A thin tube running from the tank to the device began to draw in the salt water. For a moment, nothing happened. My heart sank. Had we missed something? Was it a failure? Then a single, clear drop of water emerged from the outlet spout and fell into the beaker. It was followed by another, and another. A thin, steady, silent stream of what looked like pure, clean water. Eris grabbed a handheld salinity meter. He dipped the probe into the original saltwater tank. The meter beeped, reading 35,000 parts per million. Then, his hand trembling slightly, he dipped the probe into the beaker of freshly produced water. We both held our breath. The meter whirred for a second, and then it beeped. The screen read, 3 parts per million. It was purer than most bottled water. Eris stumbled back and sat down heavily on my father's stool, his face pale. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a look of profound, world-altering shock. He did it, Eris whispered. The stubborn, brilliant son of a bitch, he actually did it. That night, the celebration was a quiet one. We sat in the kitchen, drinking tea, the prototype sitting on the table between us like a holy relic. The initial euphoria was beginning to be replaced by the daunting reality of what we had. This is not just an invention, Will, Eris said, his voice low and serious. This is a geopolitical event. This changes everything. Agriculture, industry, urban development. It ends water wars before they begin. And because of that, it's also incredibly dangerous. The moment we reveal this, every corporation and government on the planet will try to take it from you. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do? We build a fortress, Eris said. Not a physical one. A legal one. An intellectual one. We need to be smarter, faster, and more prepared than they are. He looked at me intently. Your brother, the venture capitalist. What will he do when he finds out? He'll try to take it, I said without hesitation. He'll see it as his birthright, the asset he was cheated out of. He'll lawyer up. He'll lie. He'll do whatever it takes. Then we have to make sure that by the time he realizes what he's lost, he has absolutely no legal path to get it back, Eris said. I know a lawyer. She's not the kind of person you hire to read a will. She's the kind of person you hire to start a war. Her name is Maria Cardenas. She specializes in intellectual property and corporate structuring for disruptive technologies. She's brilliant, she's ruthless, and she owes me a favor. The next morning, I was on a video call with a woman who radiated an intimidating level of competence. Maria Cardenas was sharp, direct, and had eyes that seemed to see right through you. I nervously explained the situation. The will, the prototype, my brother. She listened patiently, without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Mr. Vance, she said finally, her voice crisp, let me be clear about your situation. Your brother's claim is based on his assumption that he inherited your father's intellectual property. However, the will is very specific. He inherited the house and the bank account. You inherited the contents of the workshop. Your father was clever. The value isn't in some abstract patent filed with the government. It's in the physical manifestation of the idea, the blueprints, the journals, and the prototype. He didn't give you a patent, he gave you the thing itself. She continued. The original patents your brother was likely tracking were probably provisional or narrow in scope, designed to protect specific components while he worked. It's a common strategy for inventors in deep research. They likely have expired or are unenforceable without the core, proprietary knowledge contained in those journals. What we have is a trade secret, a far more powerful position if we manage it correctly. This was the start of our secret plan. For the next week, the three of us, me, Eris, and Maria, on a secure video link, held a series of intense strategy sessions. It was my own personal war room. Maria's logic was devastatingly simple. We don't fight Ethan on his terms. We make his terms irrelevant. We will form a new corporate entity. You will be the majority shareholder. Dr. Thorne will be a minority partner. This new company will be the sole owner of the technology. We will transfer your inheritance, the physical prototype and blueprints, to the company as its foundational asset. Then we will file a new comprehensive suite of patents under the company's name, patents that cover every aspect of the technology, from the synthesized ceramic to the resonant frequency algorithms. By the time your brother figures out what he's lost, he won't be fighting his failures of a brother. He'll be facing a legally armored corporation with Dr. Thorne's name attached to it. We named the company Ethelred Innovations. It was a nod to my father, who had a strange obsession with obscure Anglo-Saxon kings. It felt right. It was a name rooted in history, in something solid and old. While Ethan's realtor was putting a for sale sign on the front lawn of my childhood home, I was in the workshop with Eris, meticulously photographing and documenting every single component, every schematic, every page of my father's journals for Maria's patent filings. We were building our fortress, brick by legal brick. My brother called once during this period. I saw his name flash on my phone and my stomach tightened into a knot. I let it go to voicemail. His message was exactly what I expected. Will, it's Ethan. Brenda tells me you're being slow about clearing out your junk. I've got a cash offer on the house, and I'm not going to lose it because you're dragging your feet. I want you and all of Dad's crap out of there by Friday. I'll have a disposal crew come by on Saturday to take whatever's left. Don't make this difficult. I played the message for Eris and Maria. Maria just smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. Good, she said. He's arrogant. He's focused on the house. He has no idea where the real value is. Let him think he's winning. The most dangerous opponent is the one who believes you aren't even in the game. That night, we worked late, finishing the last of the patent applications. As I signed the documents, I felt the last vestiges of the old will, the timid caregiver, the family failure, fall away. I was no longer the janitor. I was the heir, and the game was about to begin. The first move wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a triumphant announcement. It was quiet, precise, and executed, with the surgical calm Maria had instilled in us. We didn't target my brother. We didn't target the market. We targeted the one group of people who would understand the soul of my father's work, the humanitarian sector. Eris, using his formidable reputation and network, arranged a private demonstration. It wasn't for investors or venture capitalists. It was for a small hand-picked panel from the Global Water Initiative, a massive NGO known for its rigorous scientific vetting and its focus on deploying sustainable technology in the most water-scarce regions on Earth. Maria was adamant about the strategy. We don't want their money, she had explained in our final briefing. Not yet. We want their validation. We want the world's foremost authority on water scarcity to see this, to test it, and to verify it independently. Their endorsement is worth more than any venture capital check. It gives us unimpeachable credibility. It makes us the good guys. It was a brilliant move. It inoculated us against any attempt by Ethan to paint this as a greedy grab for money. We were positioning ourselves as philanthropists, not profiteers. The demonstration took place in a secure laboratory at Eris's university. We flew the prototype out under a level of secrecy that would have made a spy proud. The panel consisted of 4 people. 2 hardened field engineers who had spent their lives in arid sun-baked landscapes, a renowned hydrologist, and the GWI's executive director, a formidable woman named Dr. Lena Hansen. They were polite but deeply skeptical. They had seen 1,000 miracle water solutions in their time, and they had a well-honed skepticism for anything that sounded too good to be true. I was terrified. Standing in front of these titans of their field, I felt like an imposter. I was just Will, the caregiver, but Eris stood beside me, a steadying presence. He handled the initial scientific briefing, explaining the core principles of resonant cascade desalination. He spoke their language, using data and physics, not hyperbole. Then he turned the floor over to me. "Dr. Thorne can explain the how." I began, my voice steadier than I expected. But my father wanted me to explain the why. He saw the world spending billions on brute force solutions, on bigger pumps and higher pressures. He believed the answer wasn't in more power, but in more understanding. He called it mechanical empathy, finding the natural frequency of a system and working with it, not against it. This device doesn't fight the water. It persuades it to let go of the salt. I walked them through the design, the synthesized ceramic transducers, the low-power field emitter. I repeated the words my father had murmured to himself in the workshop, words I had absorbed over a decade of quiet observation. I wasn't an engineer, but I was a translator. I was channeling my father's vision. Then it was time for the demonstration. We used the same simple setup, a tank of salt water and a collection beaker. I flipped the switch. The now familiar, high-pitched hum filled the lab. The silent, steady stream of pure water began to flow. The 2 field engineers, men with leathery skin and seen-it-all eyes, leaned in close, their skepticism melting away into focused curiosity. The hydrologist immediately began taking samples, running them on her own portable testing equipment. Dr. Hansen just stood back, her arms crossed, watching the prototype, watching me. After 10 minutes, the hydrologist looked up from her instruments, her face pale. "The TDS count is consistently below 5 parts per million," she said. Her voice hushed with disbelief. "But the energy consumption, my God. Our field units use 100 times this much power to produce water a tenth as pure." Dr. Hansen walked over to the prototype. She didn't look at the machine, she looked at me. "Your father, he did this alone, in his workshop. For the last 20 years of his life," I confirmed. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Mr. Vance, what we are looking at is not just an invention. It is a fundamental human right, made manifest. This changes the entire conversation around water scarcity. We had them. The validation was absolute, and more powerful than I could have imagined. As we had planned, we didn't ask for a contract or funding. We simply thanked them for their time and their expert assessment. We packed up the prototype and left. Maria's strategy was working. We hadn't made a sound, but we had just dropped a bomb. The fallout was silent, at first. A week later, Eris got a call from a journalist at Global Tech Review, a highly respected industry journal. One of the GWI panel members, bound by a non-disclosure agreement, but unable to contain their excitement, had leaked the story. They didn't have all the details, but they had enough. The journalist, a woman named Chloe Fung, was tenacious. Eris, following Maria's script, was cagey but confirmatory. He confirmed the existence of Athelred Innovations. He confirmed they were working on a revolutionary, low-energy desalination technology. He confirmed it had been verified by a leading independent body. He refused to give any more details, which only fanned the flames. The article came out 2 days later. The headline was explosive: "Athelred's Cascade has a secretive startup solved water scarcity." The piece was a masterwork of speculative journalism. It spoke of a lost technology, developed by a reclusive genius, and now brought to light by his heir. It quoted anonymous sources from the GWI who called it the holy grail of water purification. It didn't mention my name or Ethan's. It was all about Athelred Innovations and the mysterious, paradigm-shifting technology. This was the first public signal, and it landed exactly where we intended. The antagonist panic began. As Maria had predicted, not with a bang but with a frantic series of phone calls. I knew this because I had one ally I hadn't counted on: the estate lawyer, Mr. Sterling. After the will reading, he had pulled me aside briefly. "Your father was a brilliant man, William," he'd said, a flicker of something like sympathy in his old eyes. "And a very specific man. This was exactly how he wanted it. He had given me his private cell number. If your brother causes any complexities." Sterling called me the day after the article was published. "William," he said, foregoing any pleasantries, "I thought you should know. Your brother has been on the phone with me all morning. He is, to put it mildly, apoplectic." According to Sterling, Ethan had seen the article. The words desalination, reclusive genius, and air had set off alarm bells in his head. His first assumption, of course, was that someone had stolen his inheritance. He was screaming at Sterling, demanding to know the status of all of Arthur Vance's technology patents. He wanted to sue this Athelred company into oblivion for patent infringement. This was the moment our legal fortress proved its worth. Sterling, a man who lived for the cold, hard letter of the law, had calmly informed Ethan of the facts. The original patents were provisional and had lapsed years ago. They were legally worthless. The core of the invention, the intellectual property, was not a registered document, but a trade secret embodied in the physical blueprints and a working prototype. And according to the will, a document Sterling had right in front of him, the entire contents of the workshop had been bequeathed, without ambiguity, to me. There was, Sterling reported, a long, stunned silence on Ethan's end of the phone. The gears were turning. The horrifying realization was dawning on him. The junk. The worthless crap he'd told me to clear out. The scraps he was going to have a disposal crew haul away to a landfill. That was the invention. The panic escalated. Ethan, now realizing he couldn't sue a stranger, understood he had to deal with his brother. My phone started ringing, and ringing, and ringing. Ethan's name flashed on the screen again and again. I followed Maria's instructions to the letter. I didn't answer. I let the silence do the talking. Each unanswered call was another turn of the screw, another moment for him to contemplate the sheer magnitude of his miscalculation. He had held a winning lottery ticket in his hand, and had thrown it in the trash out of sheer arrogant contempt. He left a series of voicemails, each one a study in escalating panic. The first was angry and demanding. "Will, call me. Now we need to talk about this Athelred thing. You have something that belongs to me." The second was pleading. "Will, look. Maybe I was a bit hasty. We're brothers. We should be doing this together. This is Dad's legacy. Call me." The third was just a string of frustrated, incoherent curses. The silent takeover was complete. We hadn't fired a single shot. We had simply revealed the truth, and the market, along with my brother's own greed, did the rest. He had spent his life chasing deals, leveraging assets, and building a world based on monetary value. He was about to learn a very hard lesson about a different kind of currency, a currency of loyalty, time and legacy that he had declared bankrupt years ago. The power shift was swift and brutal, and it came from a direction Ethan never would have anticipated. As a venture capitalist, he lived and died by his reputation and his network. His entire career was built on convincing people with money that he knew how to spot the next big thing. The Athelred Innovations article didn't just cause him private panic, it caused him public humiliation. Aries got a call a few days after the article dropped. It was from a managing partner at a major San Francisco-based investment fund, a behemoth called Northgate Capital. As it turned out, Ethan had been desperately courting Northgate for months, trying to get them to invest in his own new, much smaller VC firm. They had, as Eris later found out, repeatedly slow-walked him, unimpressed by his portfolio of what they considered derivative, Me Too tech investments. Dr. Thorne, the partner on the phone, said, "I'll be direct. We saw the piece in Global Tech Review. We've been following your work for years. If what that article says is true, Athelred isn't just a company, it's a new industrial category. My partners and I would like to schedule a meeting with you and the founder at your earliest convenience." Eris, cool as ever, played his part perfectly. "I appreciate the interest," he said calmly, "but Athelred is not currently seeking venture funding. Our focus is on humanitarian deployment first. We're in advanced discussions with the Global Water Initiative." This, of course, was like waving a red flag in front of a bull. Telling a VC firm that you don't want their money is the surest way to make them want to give it to you. The partner was practically begging for a meeting. The subtext was clear. Northgate Capital had found the next big thing, and my brother, the man who was supposed to be their guide to the future, had completely missed it. Worse, it had been sitting in his own family's backyard. The news of Northgate's interest must have gotten back to Ethan through the industry grapevine, because his strategy shifted from panicked phone calls to a desperate, last-ditch attempt at manipulation. He didn't call, he just showed up. I was in the workshop with Eris, carefully packing the last of my father's specialized tools into custom-built foam cases. We were moving the entire operation to a secure R&D space near Eris's university. The for sale sign on the lawn was now plastered with a bold sold banner. Ethan had gotten his cash offer. He had won the battle he thought mattered. The front door of the house opened and closed, and his heavy, expensive footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors. He appeared in the workshop doorway, looking wildly out of place in his tailored suit against the backdrop of old machinery. He had a forced, unnatural smile on his face, the kind a predator uses to feign friendliness. "Will," he said, his voice slick with false bonhomie. "There you are. I've been trying to reach you." I didn't say anything. I just continued my work, carefully placing a set of calipers into its case. Eris gave a curt nod and went back to labeling a crate. We were giving him nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just cool, professional indifference. "Look at this place," Ethan said, gesturing around the room. "The memories, huh? Dad in here tinkering away." He was trying to build a bridge of nostalgia to a place he had never willingly visited. It was pathetic. "I saw that article," he said, finally getting to the point. "Ethelred Innovations. Clever name. Dad would have liked it." I closed the lid on the case with a quiet click. "What do you want, Ethan?" His fake smile faltered for a second. "I want to help, Will. This is too big for you. You don't know this world. The sharks, the politics. You need someone who can navigate all that. You need me." He took a step into the room. "This is our family's legacy. We should do this together, 50-50. We'll build an empire. We can be rich, Will. Richer than we ever dreamed." The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it almost made me laugh. After years of derision, after calling my father's life's work junk, after trying to have it hauled to the dump, here he was, offering to cut me in on my own inheritance. He hadn't changed at all. He still saw it as a thing to be monetized, a path to an empire. He still didn't understand. I finally stopped what I was doing and turned to face him fully. I looked him dead in the eye. "No," I said. The word hung in the air between us. It was so simple, so final. It wasn't a negotiating tactic. It was a judgment. "What do you mean?" "No," he stammered, his composure finally cracking. "Don't be a fool, Will. This is $1 billion idea. You can't handle this on your own. You were a caregiver. What do you know about building a company?" "I know what the work is for," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of a decade of observation. "You see a $1 billion idea. I see a way to bring water to people who have none. You see a path to an empire. I see a way to honor our father's last wish. You saw a balance sheet. I saw a legacy." Dad knew the difference. I picked up another case and carried it towards the door, walking right past him. Eris followed, carrying a heavy crate. We were leaving. We were taking the future with us. Ethan stood there, alone in the middle of the nearly empty workshop, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. He had come to make a deal, to reassert his control, to claim what he believed was his. But there was no deal to be made. The power had shifted. He wasn't the CEO in this situation. He wasn't even on the board. He was just a ghost, haunting a house that was no longer his, surrounded by the echoes of a treasure he had thrown away. The talent, the opportunity, the very legacy he craved. It was all walking out the door, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The final confrontation wasn't a shouting match. It wasn't a dramatic showdown in a boardroom. It happened a week later, over the phone. It was the most satisfying conversation of my life, and I barely had to say a word. After his humiliating failure to intimidate me in the workshop, Ethan had apparently gone to his own high-priced lawyers, desperate to find some loophole, some angle he could use to claw his way back in. They had obviously told him what Maria told me from the very beginning. He had no case. The will was ironclad. The intellectual property was a trade secret, legally and physically in my possession. His only path was through me. He called me one last time. His tone was completely different. The arrogance was gone. The anger was gone. The fake friendliness was gone. All that was left was a raw, desperate pleading. "Will, please," he began. His voice strained. "You have to listen to me. I was wrong, okay? I was an idiot. I was stressed about the estate. I wasn't thinking clearly. I never should have called Dad's work that. I'm sorry." It was the first time in our adult lives I had ever heard him apologize for anything. It meant nothing. It was a tactic, a key he was trying in a lock that had already been changed. "Dad would have wanted us to do this together," he said, his voice cracking with emotion that might have even been real. Family was everything to him. He wouldn't want us to be like this. He would want his sons to be partners, to build on his legacy. He was playing his last card, the appeal to a shared familial sentiment he had spent his entire life desecrating. He was invoking the memory of the father he had treated like a depreciating asset. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the checkmate. "You're right, Ethan," I said, my voice perfectly calm. Dad was very specific about what he wanted. I was in our new clean and quiet R&D facility. On the table in front of me was the original manila envelope. I picked up the note that had been tucked inside the journal. The single folded piece of paper that had started everything. I held it up to the phone's microphone. "He left a note for me," I said. "I think you should hear it." I read the words slowly, deliberately, letting each one land with its full devastating weight. "One son wanted my money. The other wanted my time. Only he deserves my work." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was a silence so deep, so profound, it felt like the end of the world. I could hear his sharp intake of breath. In that moment, I knew he finally understood. This wasn't a business deal that had gone sour. This wasn't a sibling rivalry. This was a final judgment, delivered from beyond the grave. He hadn't just been disinherited from the money-making potential of the invention. He had been seen, weighed, and found wanting by the one man whose approval he had secretly, desperately craved. His entire life, his entire definition of success, the corner office, the German car, the fawning articles, it had all been a desperate attempt to impress a man who was only ever impressed by quiet integrity. He didn't say another word. He just hung up. That was the last time I ever spoke to my brother. The new reality began to take shape. Ethelred Innovations, in partnership with the Global Water Initiative, didn't go the VC route. We accepted a massive development grant, structured by Maria to ensure we retained full control of the intellectual property. Our prime directive wasn't to maximize shareholder value, it was to deploy the technology as widely and cheaply as possible. Our first project was a pilot program in a drought-stricken region of East Africa, a place the GWI had been trying to support for years with failing, high-energy desalination plants. I went there myself, along with the 2 hardened field engineers from the GWI panel. For 3 months I lived out of a tent, working under a punishing sun. It was the hardest I had ever worked in my life. And the most rewarding. I wasn't an architect or a caregiver. I was a builder. I was on the ground, teaching the local teams how to operate and maintain the units, seeing the direct impact of my father's dream. The day we switched on the first full-scale plant was a day I'll never forget. Hundreds of villagers had gathered. They were quiet, hopeful, but wary of another broken promise from outsiders. When the first gush of clean, fresh water poured from the main pipe, a sound I had only ever heard in a sterile lab, the silence broke. A cheer went up, a wave of pure, unadulterated joy that washed over me. Children ran into the water, splashing and laughing. Mothers filled their jugs, tears of relief streaming down their faces. In that moment, standing there covered in dust and sweat, I felt a sense of vindication so profound it was almost overwhelming. This was the empire my father wanted to build. An empire of clean water, of renewed life, of quiet competence fulfilling its purpose. News from the other world, Ethan's world, trickled back to me in snippets through Aris and news alerts. His VC firm, already on shaky ground, had collapsed. The public humiliation of the Northgate Capital incident, combined with his now toxic reputation, had caused his investors to pull out. He had sold the house, but from what I heard, he'd lost a significant portion of his own money in the fallout. He was a ghost in the financial world, a cautionary tale whispered about at cocktail parties. His arrogance had cost him everything. He was a man who had stood on a mountain of gold and managed to bankrupt himself. The system, as my father might have said, had corrected itself. I was in my new office one day, back in the States, planning the next phase of deployment. I was no longer a reclusive caregiver, but the head of a global project, surrounded by a team of brilliant, dedicated people who believed in the mission. I was in a meeting, at the head of a table, my loyal team and grateful partners around me. We were looking at a map of the world, not as a collection of markets, but as a network of needs. And for the first time in a long time, my life felt perfectly in balance. I have a picture on my desk. It's of my father and me in the workshop, taken by my mother years before either of them got sick. He's showing me how to use a soldering iron. I'm a kid, maybe 10 years old, looking on with rapt attention. For a long time, I looked at that picture and saw the beginning of a life I'd lost, a career in architecture I'd abandoned. Now, I see something different. I see the beginning of my true apprenticeship. I see a father passing on not just a skill, but a way of seeing the world. He was teaching me how to build things that last. My father's note sits in a small frame next to the picture. One son wanted my money, the other wanted my time. Only he deserves my work. It's not a trophy of my victory over Ethan. It's a compass. It's a reminder that the most valuable things in this world are rarely the ones that come with a price tag. Time, loyalty, attention, purpose. These are the currencies that truly matter. They can't be bought, sold, or leveraged in a portfolio. They can only be earned. So now, I want to talk to you. To anyone out there who feels stuck, overlooked, or defined by someone else's narrow idea of success. We live in a world that shouts, a world obsessed with brute force, with the quick flip, the easy exit. It celebrates the Ethans of the world, the ones who are good at counting money, and it often dismisses the quiet, steady hands that build the things worth counting. Your value is not determined by your job title, your bank account, or the approval of people who can't see past a spreadsheet. Your true value lies in your competence, in your integrity, in the time and care you invest in the things that matter. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. Never let anyone convince you that your dedication is a liability or that your loyalty is a weakness. The world is full of noise, but real, lasting change is almost always built in the quiet, by the patient hands of people who, like my father, are just trying to find the right frequency. So trust in your work, trust in your worth, and never ever let the crows convince you that your life's work is just junk. Thanks for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I hope you'll like this video. Leave a comment and share your own experiences. I read them all, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories about how the most important work is often the work no one sees.